There are certain days that arrive already crowned with expectation. They do not ask to be trusted, they assume it. This was one of those days. Morning light spilled gently over the Savannah River, turning the water into brushed gold as it drifted past the old cathedral on River Street. The building had survived wars, floods, and centuries of whispered prayers. Today, it had been restored for something softer, something hopeful, a wedding that everyone believed in. Inside the bridal suite, Naomi Carter stood perfectly still, as if the world might shatter if she moved too quickly. She was 32, a Black American woman whose life had been shaped by courtrooms, deadlines, and hard-earned victories. As a civil rights attorney, Naomi was accustomed to standing firm under pressure, to choosing her words carefully, to reading between lines others barely noticed. But this morning she had allowed herself to be something else entirely. A bride. Her gown hung near the tall windows, ivory silk flowing like calm water, elegant without excess. It had taken her months to choose it, not because she wanted perfection, but because she wanted truth. Something that felt like her, something that did not pretend. Outside, church bells practiced softly, their sound folding into the hum of the city waking up. Inside, the air smelled faintly of gardenias and warm stone. Naomi's reflection watched her from the mirror with steady eyes, dark, thoughtful, unafraid. There was joy there, real joy, the kind built slowly, carefully, over years. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, she would marry the man she believed she knew. Friends and family filled the adjoining rooms with quiet excitement. Laughter rose and fell like music. Someone adjusted a hem. Someone else whispered about seating charts and weather forecasts. These were the harmless details people cling to on days like this, as if order itself could guarantee happiness. Naomi smiled when her cousin Talia stepped in, holding a phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "You're calm," Talia said, half impressed, half suspicious. Naomi laughed softly. "I've argued constitutional law in front of judges who already made up their minds. This feels manageable." What she did not say was that this day felt earned. 8 years of love did that. 8 years of believing, compromising, forgiving, choosing. Andrew Whitmore had been part of that story since before she was certain of her own future. He had seen her exhausted and triumphant, doubtful and driven. He had promised her stability, partnership, a life built on shared values and shared mornings. Everyone said they made sense together. Everyone said this was right. Naomi believed it too. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her. She thought of the vows she had written late one night, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Words about trust, about choosing each other even when the world was loud, about faith, not the kind written in books, but the kind proven in small, daily acts. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, lifting Spanish moss like lace. Time continued its gentle march forward. It was 12:45 p.m., 3 hours before the ceremony. 3 hours before everything would change, though Naomi did not know that yet. She reached out and touched the fabric of her dress, fingertips lingering just long enough to feel grounded. Somewhere below, doors opened and closed. Voices echoed faintly. Life continued, certain and confident in its direction. And if, as you read this, you find yourself smiling at the promise of the moment, or sensing that quiet tension beneath its beauty, stay with the story. Sometimes the most unforgettable truths reveal themselves only after we believe completely. If this beginning already stirred something in you, take a moment to show your support. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow along. You won't want to miss what comes next. Because this was the day everyone believed in. And belief, as Naomi would soon learn, is a powerful thing, especially right before it breaks. If love had a public face, Andrew Whitmore wore it well. He was the kind of man strangers trusted within minutes. Tall, neatly put together, with an easy smile that suggested he'd never been hurried by doubt. Even when he was silent, he seemed to be listening. Even when he was busy, he looked as though he had time. There are people who move through the world like polished stone, Smooth edges, steady weight, and Andrew had always been that. Naomi met him long before the cathedral, long before the dress, long before anyone called them inevitable. They were younger then, standing at the edge of their adult lives with the same brave, trembling optimism. She had been fresh out of law school, minds sharpened by ideals and sleepless nights, determined to make justice more than a slogan. He had been on the rise in urban development, the kind of work that sounded clean and civic-minded when described at dinner parties. Revitalization, community partnerships, building a better future. His language was careful, persuasive, filled with the promise of improvement. They first spoke at a charity panel in Atlanta, an event where everyone wore their best intentions like tailored coats. Naomi had asked a pointed question about displacement, about neighborhoods hollowed out by glossy projects that didn't include the people who had built their lives there. Andrew had answered smoothly, acknowledging the concern, offering the right phrases, the right assurances. Afterward, he found her near the refreshment table, holding a glass of water like it was armor. "You were right to ask that," he said. "Most people don't." Naomi studied him, suspicion and curiosity braided together. "Most people don't like the answer." Andrew didn't flinch. "Then it's a good thing I'm still learning how to earn trust." That line should have sounded rehearsed. It should have been too neat, but there was something in his tone, an earnestness, or the careful imitation of it, that made Naomi pause. They began slowly, as if both of them understood that the best things require time to prove themselves. Andrew took her to quiet places, small restaurants with soft lighting, walks along riverbanks, late-night drives where the city blurred into a ribbon of lights. He remembered details. He asked questions and waited for the answers. When Naomi spoke about her cases, about people who had been dismissed, overlooked, harmed by systems designed to never apologize, Andrew listened as though her work mattered to him personally. And in those early months, it seemed it did. He would send her articles and notes. "Thought of you when I read this. This reminded me of what you said." He showed up to her events. He stood beside her at fundraisers, hands folded, eyes attentive, learning her world. He was careful with her mother, respectful with her father, charming with her friends without trying too hard. He fit into her life with the ease of someone who had always intended to. The intimacy that grew between them was not the loud, reckless kind that burns fast. It was steadier, warmer. It was a hand at the small of her back when she was tired. It was a text message that arrived at the exact moment she needed it. "Breathe. I'm proud of you. Come home." Andrew had always been good at making Naomi feel held. There were nights, years into their relationship, when she would come back to the apartment after a long day and find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, music low. He'd turn with that familiar smile, the one that had become her soft place to land. "Food first," he would say, like it was a rule of survival. "Then you can save the world again." And Naomi would let herself believe that this was what partnership looked like. Someone who not only admired her strength, but made room for it. When he proposed, he did it in a way that felt almost painfully intimate. No crowd, no cameras, no stage surprise. Just the two of them on a balcony overlooking the river, the sky bruised purple with dusk, the city breathing quietly below. Andrew took her hand as if it was something sacred. "I don't want a life that doesn't include you," he said. "I don't want to keep imagining the future and hoping you'll be there. I want to know." Naomi had stared at him for a moment, at the controlled emotion in his eyes, at the care he seemed to pour into every word. Her heart, so trained to question motives, so disciplined by reality, softened anyway. "Yes," she whispered, and then she laughed, the sound breaking free like sunlight. Later, her friends would say the same thing. It was perfect. It was Andrew being Andrew, thoughtful, steady, devoted. And maybe that was the most seductive part. Andrew Whitmore wasn't just the man Naomi loved. He was the man everyone approved of her loving. At the cathedral that afternoon, while Naomi waited upstairs in silk and quiet breath, Andrew stood elsewhere in the building, surrounded by groomsmen and murmuring plans. He adjusted his cufflinks, checked his tie, and accepted compliments like a man stepping into a destiny he deserved. He looked calm. He looked ready. If anyone had watched him then, really watched beyond the surface, they might have noticed something flicker beneath his composure. A tightness at the corner of his mouth when his phone buzzed. The way his gaze drifted briefly toward a hallway as if expecting someone. The way he exhaled too carefully, like a man keeping something contained. But no one was looking for cracks in a face that had always been so reassuring. And Naomi was still holding the version of Andrew she had chosen. The version built from 8 years of memories that felt too real to be false. She was holding him like a promise. She did not yet know that promises can be performed, that devotion can be staged, that even the gentlest hands can hide what they are capable of letting go. For now, Andrew remained what he had always seemed to be, the man she chose, the man she was about to marry, the man the world believed in, almost as much as she did. Unease rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with accusations or alarms. It slips in quietly, like a draft through a window you were certain was closed. Naomi had felt it weeks before the wedding, though she would have struggled to name it if pressed. There was no single moment she could point to, no dramatic shift in Andrew's voice or sudden cruelty in his touch. Nothing that would justify suspicion, nothing that would withstand cross-examination. Only a series of almost a pause too long before answering a question. Almost forgetting something he never forgot. Almost there, but not quite. At first, she blamed the season. Weddings made everything feel sharper, emotions heightened, schedules crowded, expectations layered upon expectations. Andrew's work had intensified as the date approached. He spoke often of meetings that ran late, of presentations that demanded his full attention, of pressure from investors who wanted certainty where certainty could not yet exist. Naomi understood pressure. She lived inside it. She respected people who carried responsibility without complaint. So when Andrew came home later than usual, loosening his tie with a tired smile, she greeted him the same way she always had. "Long day?" she would ask. "The longest," he'd reply, leaning down to kiss her forehead, the gesture practiced, familiar. "I owe you dinner. Tomorrow." Tomorrow became a common word between them. There were evenings when Naomi noticed Andrew turning his phone face down on the table, a small, deliberate movement that looked casual enough to ignore. There were mornings when he stepped out onto the balcony to take calls he once would have taken beside her, pacing just far enough that she couldn't hear the other voice. Once, she asked him about it, lightly, the way you ask about a change in weather. "Everything okay?" she said, stirring her coffee. "You've been a little elsewhere." Andrew smiled, quick and reassuring. "Just stress. I don't want to bring it home with me." She nodded. That answer made sense. It fit the man she believed him to be. And yet, Naomi had built her career on noticing what others missed. She had learned to listen not just to what was said, but to what was avoided. In court, truth often hid in the margins, in the way a witness adjusted their posture, in the rhythm of a response that didn't quite align with the question. At home, she tried not to turn that lens on the man she loved. But love does not erase instinct. It only teaches it patience. There was the canceled dinner 2 weeks before the wedding. They had reservations at a small place by the river, a tradition they had kept alive through busy seasons and long cases. Andrew texted an hour before they were supposed to leave. "I'm so sorry. Emergency meeting. Rain check?" Naomi stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Something about the timing tugged at her. She typed, "Of course," then deleted it, then typed it again. When he came home late that night, smelling faintly of cologne she didn't recognize, or perhaps had simply never noticed before, he apologized with such earnestness that her doubt felt almost cruel. She told herself that love meant generosity, that trust, once built, deserved grace. Still, the unease lingered. It followed her into quiet moments, settling beside her on the couch when she read case files. It hovered at the edge of her thoughts when she folded laundry or brushed her teeth. It asked no questions, made no accusations. It simply waited. One night, Naomi dreamed that she was standing in a familiar room, but everything in it had been rearranged. The furniture was the same, the walls were the same, yet nothing was where it should have been. She woke with her heart racing, Andrew asleep beside her, his back turned. She reached out, placing her hand lightly between his shoulders. He did not stir. In the dark, Naomi stared at the ceiling and reminded herself of all the reasons she had chosen him, of all the ways he had shown up, of all the plans they had made. Doubt, she told herself, was a luxury she could not afford on the brink of a shared future. So she did what she had always done when faced with uncertainty. She organized. She planned. She trusted the structure she had built. She buried the unease beneath guest lists and seating charts, beneath dress fittings and vendor calls. She focused on the shape of the day that was coming, on the life that waited just beyond it. Andrew was attentive during those conversations, present when it mattered, affectionate when he sensed her drifting. And perhaps that was the most confusing part of all, because when he looked at her, really looked, there was warmth there, familiarity, something that felt like love. He held her hand during tastings, whispered jokes during meetings, rested his forehead against hers when the weight of expectation grew heavy. "How did we get so lucky?" he asked her once, quiet and sincere. Naomi smiled, though something in her chest tightened. "We worked for it." "Yes," he said, "we did." The night before the wedding, Naomi stood alone in the bathroom, brushing her hair slowly, methodically. Andrew was in the bedroom, packing his overnight bag for the venue. She watched him through the mirror, noting the way he folded his clothes with care, the way he checked his pockets twice. She caught her own reflection watching him too closely and looked away. There was no evidence, no proof, only a whisper of something unbalanced, like a picture frame hung a fraction of an inch crooked. And Naomi, for all her intelligence and experience, chose not to straighten it. Because love, she believed, was not a courtroom. Because faith, she believed, was not something you tested without cause. Because the life she was about to step into felt too real, too solid, to be undone by a feeling without a name. So she went to sleep beside Andrew, her unease folded neatly away, convinced that if anything were truly wrong, it would demand her attention more loudly. She did not yet understand that some truths wait patiently, that they grow strongest in silence, and that by the time they finally speak, it is never to whisper. The knock came like a mistake, not loud enough to be urgent, not gentle enough to be polite, just firm, misplaced, as if it had wandered into the room without understanding the rules. Naomi had been standing near the window, letting the afternoon light settle over her shoulders, when the sound cut through the calm. For a moment, no one moved. The bridal suite had been suspended in a careful quiet, a space where time was softened, where voices lowered themselves instinctively, where even footsteps seemed to apologize for existing. Naomi's dress waited nearby, luminous and untouched. Her shoes were aligned with deliberate symmetry. Everything had a place. The knock did not belong. Talia looked up first, brows knitting together. "That's not the coordinator," she said under her breath. "She always texts." Naomi didn't answer. Her pulse had begun to tick faster, though she could not have said why. She told herself it was nerves, an understandable response on a day built entirely from anticipation. The knock came again. This time, someone called her name. "Naomi!" It was a man's voice. Familiar. Too familiar to be here. Talia crossed the room quickly, opening the door just enough to see who stood on the other side. Her expression shifted. Surprise first, then confusion, then something closer to alarm. "Lucas," she whispered. "You're not supposed to." "I know," he said, already stepping forward, already apologizing with his eyes. "I'm sorry. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." Naomi turned. Lucas Reed stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered in his tailored suit, his tie slightly askew as if he'd tried to straighten it and failed. He had been Andrew's closest friend since college, the one who knew all the stories, who had toasted every milestone with easy laughter and unshakable loyalty. Today, though, he looked like a man carrying weight he hadn't agreed to lift. His face was flushed, his breathing uneven. In his hand was a slim leather portfolio, dark, understated, expensive. Naomi recognized it instantly. "That's Andrew's," she said. Lucas nodded too quickly. "Yeah, he asked me to bring it up. He left it in the car." Talia stepped fully between them, protected by instinct. "This is the bridal suite. You can't just walk in." "I know," Lucas repeated, his voice rough. "I just need a second. Naomi, please." Naomi studied him with a quiet focus that had unsettled witnesses and opposing counsel alike. She noticed the way his eyes refused to settle, the way his grip tightened around the portfolio, knuckles paling, the way he swallowed before speaking again. "What's wrong?" she asked. Lucas shook his head, a reflexive denial that arrived before the question had fully landed. "Nothing. Nothing's wrong. It's just Andrew's running around downstairs, trying to fix the seating chart. You know how he gets about logistics. He asked me to bring this up so you could put his handwritten note inside, the one he keeps folded in his jacket pocket." Naomi glanced at the portfolio, then back at Lucas. "That could have waited," she said calmly. "He could have texted." "I offered," Lucas said quickly. He said it had to be now." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air denser. Naomi sensed the shift, even as she kept her voice level. "Did he say why?" Lucas hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough. "He said it was sentimental," he replied. "Lucky, I guess." Lucky. The word rang hollow, like a coin dropped on stone. Naomi reached for the portfolio. As her fingers closed around the leather, she was struck by its weight. It was heavier than she expected. Not the weight of paper or vows or a folded note meant to be touched before a ceremony. She felt it immediately, a subtle resistance, as though the object itself had something to say. Lucas released it reluctantly, his hand lingering as if he might change his mind and take it back. "Please," he said, his voice low. "Just tell him I delivered it." Naomi nodded once. "Of course." For a moment, their eyes held. In Lucas's, she saw something raw and unmistakable. Regret, sharpened by fear. Then he stepped back, retreating the way he had come, already halfway gone before Talia could close the door behind him. The latch clicked softly. Silence rushed in to fill the space he left behind. Naomi stood with the portfolio resting against her palm, the leather cool and unfamiliar. She did not open it. Not yet. She let herself feel the wrongness of the moment settle, unchallenged. Talia turned to her slowly. "That was strange." "Yes," Naomi said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. She crossed the room and set the portfolio on the table near the window, where the light traced its clean lines without revealing what lay inside. She told herself there was a reasonable explanation, that weddings caused chaos, that people forgot things. But the unease she had folded away weeks ago stirred, unfolding itself with quiet insistence. Outside, bells rang again, clearer now. Time moved forward, indifferent to doubt. Naomi rested her hand lightly on the portfolio, feeling its presence like a held breath. Whatever Andrew had asked her to place inside, whatever Lucas had carried with such visible discomfort, had arrived in her care now, and with it came the unmistakable sense that something had crossed a line. The day had not broken yet, but somewhere, unseen, it had begun to bend. Naomi did not open the portfolio right away. She stood near the table, one hand resting on the leather, as if contact could translate uncertainty into clarity. Outside the window, Savannah shimmered in late afternoon warmth. Tour boats drifting, distant laughter rising from the promenade, the river moving with the patient confidence of something that had seen every kind of human promise and survived them all. Inside the bridal suite, time felt different, softer, slower, as though the day itself was holding its breath. Talia hovered a few steps away, watching Naomi with a kind of attention reserved for fragile things. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. though she'd been in the room. Naomi's mouth curved into a small, almost amused smile, one she used in court sometimes, when a witness offered a story that was technically possible and emotionally absurd. That Andrew needed me to put something inside, she said. A note, a lucky charm, something sentimental. And that made Lucas look like he'd seen a ghost? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She kept her gaze on the portfolio. The leather was smooth, expensive, the kind of accessory chosen not just for function, but for image. Andrew liked image. He understood what it bought him: patience, admiration, the benefit of doubt. Naomi had always known that. She had simply believed he used it for good. Her fingers found the clasp. A simple snap, clean, quiet. The sound seemed too loud. She lifted the flap slowly, as if she were opening a memory rather than an object. The inside smelled faintly of cedar and cologne, Andrew's scent, familiar and intimate. The scent of dinners shared, mornings half awake, his arms around her while she pretended she didn't need comforting. The first thing she saw was ordinary. A stack of printed pages, agenda notes, neatly organized, clipped at the corner. A folded envelope addressed in Andrew's tidy handwriting, Naomi. A slim booklet embossed with the venue's crest. A pale ribbon tucked beside it, the kind of detail a groom might carry like proof he had participated. For a moment, relief loosened something in her chest. She exhaled. Then she felt it, the slight unevenness beneath the papers, as though something had been placed there and then hidden with intention. Naomi's hand paused. In that pause lived an entire history of trust. 8 years of believing that what she didn't see couldn't hurt her. 8 years of choosing tenderness over suspicion, love over interrogation. She moved the papers aside carefully. A small black phone lay nestled against the lining, its plastic dull and cheap, almost insulting in its simplicity. A prepaid device, the kind you bought at a gas station with cash and no questions. It looked obscene among Andrew's carefully curated possessions. For a second, Naomi's mind refused it. The way the body refuses pain at first, bargaining for a more reasonable reality. She stared at it as if her attention alone might change its shape into something harmless. A remote, a charger, anything. But it was unmistakable. Talia stepped closer, her heels soft on the carpet. What is that? Naomi didn't answer. She reached in and picked it up. The phone was lighter than it should have been. It felt like a toy, like an imitation of a real thing, except it was real enough to exist here, hidden inside Andrew's portfolio, delivered by a trembling best man. Naomi's thumb brushed the side button. Nothing happened. Powered off. Of course, she turned it over once, reading the tiny letters near the back, the serial number, the faint scratches that suggested it had been used often enough to lose its newness. Her heart began to beat harder, not from panic, but from recognition. This was not someone's secondary phone for work. This was not an emergency contact device. This was secrecy made portable. Talia's voice sharpened. Naomi, why would he? Naomi lifted a hand slightly, a quiet signal for silence. She had learned long ago that the first instinct after shock is noise. Questions, theories, blame. Noise feels like control. But Naomi had built her life on not wasting her focus. She turned the phone in her palm once more. Then she pressed the power button again, longer. The screen flickered. A cold blue light filled the room, catching the shine of Naomi's nails, the soft pearl of her earrings, the pale silk waiting nearby. That light made everything look slightly unreal, as if the suite had become a stage and the truth was about to step into the spotlight. The phone buzzed once, twice, then again rapidly, like a pulse that couldn't be contained. Incoming notifications stacked on the screen in a quick, relentless line. Missed messages, missed calls, dozens, maybe more, all from the same contact. A single letter, C. Naomi's throat tightened. Talia leaned closer, eyes narrowed. C, she whispered. Who is C? Naomi didn't know. And yet in some deep place beneath logic, She felt that she did. Because secrecy rarely begins as a stranger. It begins as a choice. A door cracked open. A name protected. Naomi's thumb hovered over the messages. She could stop. She could close the portfolio, turn the phone off again, pretend it hadn't happened. And if this were a different kind of love story, one built on fear of truth, that is what she might have done. But Naomi was not built for convenient blindness. She tapped the message thread. The screen loaded. Her breath caught, not because the phone was slow, but because time was suddenly too fast. The most recent message sat at the top, time-stamped only minutes earlier. Naomi read it once. Then again, as if rereading might lessen its meaning. It did the opposite. A quiet sound escaped her. Half inhale, half disbelief. The room tilted slightly, not physically, but emotionally, the way it does when the world rearranges itself in a single sentence. Talia watched Naomi's face change and went still. "What does it say?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Naomi's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She felt as though speaking would make it real in a way reading had not yet finished doing. She swallowed. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even her, she turned the phone slightly so Talia could see. The message glowed on the screen, plain and merciless. And Naomi understood, in that moment, that whatever was written there was not just information. It was a blade, and it had been waiting, patiently, in Andrew's pocket of secrets, for the exact day it would do the most damage. The object that shouldn't exist lay warm in Naomi's hand, buzzing softly with proof of another life. Outside, the river kept moving. Inside, the day everyone believed in began to fracture. Quietly at first, like fine glass under pressure, before it ever made a sound. Words have a peculiar power when they are written. Spoken lies can soften themselves with tone, with pauses, with a smile meant to persuade. Written ones have no such mercy. They sit where they are placed, unblinking, immune to reinterpretation. They wait to be read again, and again, and again. Naomi stared at the screen. The first message was short, careless, almost irritated. "You forgot the phone again." Her brow furrowed. The sentence felt intimate in a way that made her skin prickle. Not romantic, but familiar. The kind of message sent without ceremony, without explanation, confident it would be understood. Below it, another line appeared as Naomi's thumb scrolled, slow and deliberate. "If she finds this, we're done." The word she landed with weight. It did not need a name. Naomi felt the room contract around her, the edges of it pressing inward as if the truth were physically reshaping the space. She read the message again, her mind clinging to grammar, to structure, to anything that might offer a loophole. "If she finds this, we're done." Not if anyone, not if someone, she. Her phone buzzed again, the burner device catching up on time, on secrecy, on everything it had been carrying silently. More messages loaded. The screen filled. Talia's hand rose to her mouth, though she made no sound. Naomi scrolled. The next message was time-stamped from the night before. "Last night was perfect. I still can't believe you pulled that excuse off." Naomi felt something tear, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Like fabric giving way under steady pressure. She knew which night that was. Andrew had come home late, apologetic, claiming a last-minute strategy session that ran long. He had kissed her temple, murmured about exhaustion, and fallen asleep within minutes, his back warm and familiar against hers. She had lain awake listening to his breathing, thinking about vows. She scrolled again. "I hate that I have to pretend tomorrow." Tomorrow. Her fingers trembled now, no longer contained by discipline. The words on the screen blurred, then sharpened again as she forced herself to focus. "Just a few more hours," another message read. "Then we'll be free." Naomi stopped scrolling. The silence in the room grew so thick it felt as though sound itself had been removed. Even the bells outside had paused between rehearsals. The world, for a breathless second, seemed to wait. Then she continued. The messages stretched back weeks, months. There were mundane ones, complaints about schedules, jokes about meetings, frustrations disguised as flirtation. There were affectionate ones too, written in a shorthand Naomi recognized immediately. Andrew's cadence, his phrasing, the way he ended sentences when he thought he was being sincere. And threaded through them all was a chilling consistency, planning, anticipation, a future described in fragments. Naomi sank slowly onto the chair beside the table, the silk of her robe whispering against her legs. She read without crying, without stopping, as if her mind had decided that if she moved fast enough, the damage might remain theoretical. Then she reached the most recent message. It sat alone at the bottom of the thread, time-stamped less than 20 minutes ago. I'm already seated. Back row, aisle side. Don't look at me during the vows. She's watching. Naomi felt the meaning of it before she understood it. Seated. Back row. During the vows, her breath left her in a single, shallow exhale, like air escaping a punctured lung. The truth arranged itself with brutal clarity, each piece clicking into place not with chaos, but with horrifying order. The woman Andrew had been writing to was not a distant secret. She was not somewhere far away, safely removed from the sanctity of the day. She was here, in the building, in the ceremony, in the quiet anticipation of the guests already arriving downstairs. Watching, Talia's voice finally broke through the silence, thin and unsteady. Naomi, she's here? Naomi nodded once. The movement felt mechanical, as though her body were acting on instructions her heart had not yet received. Yes. The words sounded strange in her mouth, heavy, finished. She read the message again, slower this time. Don't look at me during the vows. The instruction was intimate, rehearsed, born of a shared understanding that the moment belonged to two women, one standing at the altar, one hiding in plain sight. Naomi closed her eyes. Images flooded in without permission. Andrew's smile as he practiced his vows, the careful emotion in his voice, the way he had insisted on a larger guest list, the way he had wanted the ceremony to feel full, the way he had talked about legacy and community and honesty. The audacity of it was staggering. This was not carelessness. This was design. Naomi opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at her was composed, elegant, wrapped in silk and expectation. No one would have guessed that the foundation beneath her had just cracked. Her hands were cold now. Her chest ached with a pressure that threatened to become pain. This isn't just an affair, Talia said quietly, tears finally gathering in her eyes. This is cruelty. Naomi said nothing. She was staring at the screen again, at the words that had been written with such confidence, such disregard. Words meant to stay hidden, words that had believed themselves safe. She powered the phone off slowly, deliberately, as if closing a case file. The truth was no longer unfolding. It had finished revealing itself. Naomi stood. The movement surprised Talia, who reached out instinctively, as though Naomi might fall. But Naomi was steady, eerily so. Something had shifted inside her, something precise and irrevocable. The love she had carried for 8 years did not vanish in that moment. It shattered, and in its place something else began to form. Not yet anger, not yet resolve, but clarity. Cold, lucid, undeniable clarity. The truth, after all, was now written. And written truths, Naomi knew better than most, do not disappear simply because someone wishes they had never been read. The first betrayal had weight. It was heavy, brutal, unmistakable. But the second was sharper. It arrived not as a revelation, but as a realization. Quiet, exact, and infinitely more personal. Naomi stood very still, the powered-off phone resting in her palm like a cooling ember, and allowed the truth to finish arranging itself in her mind. Andrew had not only chosen deception, he had chosen proximity. This was the part her body understood before her heart dared to. A slow nausea rose, not from shock now, but from violation. The kind that comes when you realize someone has stepped not just into your life, but into your most sacred space, and done so deliberately. She's here, Naomi said again, softer this time. The words did not tremble. They settled. Talia sank onto the edge of the sofa, one hand pressed against her chest. "In the church," she whispered. "While you're getting ready to marry him," Naomi finished. She looked down at her hands. They were steady. That unsettled her more than shaking would have. She had always believed that losing control would feel dramatic. Tears, collapse, fury breaking free all at once. Instead, what she felt was a narrowing, a focusing, as though her world had drawn a clean line around what mattered and erased everything else. The woman was not just a secret, she was a participant. Naomi replayed the message in her mind, each word etched now with merciless clarity. "I'm already seated. Not hiding, not waiting outside. Seated. Back row, aisle side. A vantage point, an escape route. Don't look at me during the vows. She's watching." A conspiracy disguised as caution. A shared thrill. Naomi closed her eyes and imagined the sanctuary downstairs as it must look now. Rows of polished wood, soft light filtering through stained glass, guests murmuring, adjusting coats, smiling with the easy anticipation of people who believe they are about to witness love. Somewhere among them sat a woman who had read Andrew's words the night before, who had known where he would stand, who had known Naomi would walk toward him believing she was chosen. That woman had dressed this morning knowing exactly what she was coming to see. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had taken a seat. Naomi inhaled slowly, then exhaled just as carefully. She felt the ache of it settle deep in her chest. Not a sharp pain, but a dense one, like a stone dropped into water that never quite reaches the bottom. "This isn't just about him," she said at last. Talia looked up, eyes red. "What do you mean?" Naomi opened her eyes and met her gaze. "He didn't just lie to me. He invited her into my humiliation." The sentence felt foreign in her mouth, as though it belonged to someone else. But it was precise, and precision had always been Naomi's refuge. She thought of all the decisions Andrew had made to arrive at this moment. The timing, the messages, the insistence on a large ceremony, on openness, on community. The way he had framed the wedding as something meaningful, symbolic. It was symbolic, just not in the way she had believed. Naomi turned back toward the mirror. The woman reflected there looked untouched by catastrophe. Hair neatly arranged, skin luminous, posture composed. A bride, perfectly assembled. And somewhere in that image was the cruelest irony of all. Andrew had trusted her strength enough to exploit it. He had believed she would endure, that she would smile through discomfort, rationalize oddities, preserve appearances, that she would protect the story they had built, even if it meant erasing herself to do so. That assumption burned. Naomi felt anger stir then. Not wild, not reckless, but controlled, deliberate. It rose not from wounded pride, but from an offense far deeper. This was not simply infidelity. This was spectacle. This was power used without consent. Talia stood and came to her side, voice breaking. "We can stop this," she said. "Right now. We can tell people there's an emergency. You don't owe anyone." Naomi shook her head gently. "I owe myself the truth," she replied. "And so does everyone else who's about to sit down there and celebrate a lie." She picked up the phone again, feeling its cool surface against her skin. It no longer felt shocking. It felt like evidence. Somewhere below, footsteps echoed. A laugh rang out. A door opened and closed. The ceremony was assembling itself, unaware that it had already been compromised. Naomi imagined Andrew downstairs, adjusting his cufflinks, rehearsing his expression. Imagine the other woman checking her phone, waiting for reassurance, for instruction. They were both expecting Naomi to arrive exactly as planned. That was the second betrayal. Not just what Andrew had done, but what he assumed she would accept. Naomi straightened her shoulders. Something inside her shifted again. Not into vengeance, not yet, but into resolve. The kind that forms when illusion dies and clarity takes its place. She had spent her life fighting for dignity on behalf of others. She recognized now that this too was a case, and it was personal. The second betrayal had stripped away the last of her doubt. She was no longer reacting to discovery. She was responding to intent. And intent, once revealed, demands to be answered. Naomi thought grief would arrive like a storm. She expected it to be loud, furniture overturned inside her chest, breath stolen, tears spilling without permission. She expected to feel theatrical, ruined, undone. That is how heartbreak is written in the stories people tell when they want pain to look romantic. But heartbreak, in its truest form, is rarely romantic. It is clinical. It is the moment your body realizes the world is unsafe and begins to ration oxygen. Naomi stood with the burner phone in her hand, staring at nothing, while the bridal suite continued to exist around her as if nothing had happened. The gown still hung near the window, pure and waiting. The perfume in the air still clung to its sweetness. The city outside still glowed with late afternoon promise. Only Naomi had changed. Talia's voice came from far away, muffled, as though Naomi were underwater. "Naomi, sit down, please." Naomi nodded once, though she wasn't sure if the motion belonged to her. She crossed the room and lowered herself onto the chair by the vanity. The mirror framed her face, calm, composed, almost luminous in its stillness. A stranger's face. Her hands were cold. Her fingertips tingled. She placed the phone on the table and folded her palms together, pressing them as if prayer could compress panic into silence. For several seconds, she did not cry. She simply stared at the grain of the wood, noticing absurd details. The faint scratch near the edge, the way the sunlight made a thin line across the surface. Her mind tried to anchor itself in anything tangible, anything that did not require emotion. Then her breath hitched. Once, twice. A sharp inhale that did not reach her lungs fully. A shallow exhale that felt insufficient. Her chest tightened as though an invisible hand had curled around her ribs. Talia moved quickly, kneeling beside her, taking Naomi's hands. "Breathe with me," she whispered. "In, out. In." Naomi tried. Her lungs refused. The room tilted, not dramatically but subtly, the way it does when your blood pressure drops. Naomi pressed her palm against the edge of the vanity, grounding herself. Her mouth tasted faintly metallic. She swallowed hard and felt nausea rise, thick and insistent. This was the collapse. It was not loud. It was quiet violence. Talia's face blurred with tears. "Oh, baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Naomi wanted to answer. She wanted to say something intelligent, something controlled, something that would reassure Talia, something that would put shape around the chaos. But the words did not come. Instead, a single sound escaped her throat, small, broken, involuntary. A sob that seemed to surprise her as much as it did Talia. And then the tears arrived. Not gentle tears, not cinematic ones that fall like pearls and make a woman look tragically beautiful. These were hot, relentless, humiliating tears that surged forward as if her body had been storing them for weeks, waiting for permission to release. Naomi covered her mouth with her hand, as if she could hide the sound, as if pain could be made private by willpower. She cried for the wedding. She cried for the years. She cried for every moment she had defended Andrew in her mind, every time she had chosen trust over instinct. And beneath it all, she cried for something simpler and more devastating. She cried because she had loved him. There is a particular kind of grief reserved for betrayals that arrive wearing the face of home. It does not just break the heart, it rearranges memory. It turns every tender moment into a question, every "I love you" into a suspected performance. Naomi's shoulders shook. She bowed her head, letting the tears fall onto her clasped hands. The silk of her robe dampened at the wrists. Her breath came in uneven fragments. Talia stayed close, silent now, her presence steady, an anchor rather than a witness. Minutes passed, maybe 2. Maybe 10. Time became strange. At some point, Naomi lifted her face toward the mirror again. Eyes reddened, cheeks wet. The image looked raw, exposed, human in a way she had not allowed herself to be in years. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the grief shifted. It did not disappear. It tightened. Naomi inhaled deeply for the first time since the messages. Her lungs opened, the air cool and sharp. She wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand, then reached for a tissue with slow precision. She dabbed at her skin carefully, as if she were restoring order to a world that had lost containment. In the courtroom, Naomi had learned that emotion could be used against you. People loved to call a woman hysterical when she was simply hurt, irrational when she was simply angry. She had trained herself to feel everything and show only what served her. This moment demanded that skill, not because she wanted to look strong, but because she needed to remain able. She closed her eyes and gave herself a boundary. 5 minutes, she thought. 5 minutes to fall apart. She looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand moved smoothly, indifferent. Naomi watched it for a long moment, then lowered her gaze to her hands. She had already spent more than 5. She let out a slow, controlled breath and straightened her spine. Talia's voice was cautious now. Naomi, we can call it off. We can... Naomi lifted a hand gently, not to silence Talia, but to slow the world. I know, she said quietly. Her voice sounded scraped clean, stripped of softness. It was not cold yet. It was simply emptied of illusion. Naomi reached for the burner phone and slid it into the pocket of her robe like a document that needed protecting. She felt its weight there, a reminder, a proof, a line drawn in ink. Her heart still ached. The ache did not lessen, but beneath the ache, something else had appeared. Focus. The collapse had happened. Now came the containment. Naomi looked at herself in the mirror one more time and made a silent promise. Not to Andrew, not to anyone else, but to the woman staring back at her. Whatever happens next, she thought, I will not be erased inside my own life. Outside, the river continued to move, patient and bright. Downstairs, guests continued to arrive, smiling, believing. And upstairs, Naomi Carter, eyes still damp, hands now steady, began to gather herself, not into denial, but into purpose. After grief comes a strange clarity. It is not kindness. It is not peace. It is the mind's emergency lantern, flicked on when the room has gone dark, illuminating only what is necessary to survive. Naomi felt it settle over her like a tailored jacket, familiar, structured, slightly heavy on the shoulders. The lawyer in her, quiet for weeks beneath flowers and fittings, lifted her head. Naomi stood at the vanity again, not as a bride waiting to be adored, but as a woman assessing a scene. Her reflection stared back with eyes that had cried, yes, but were no longer pleading. The softness remained in her face, the tenderness Andrew had once claimed to cherish, but it had been reinforced now by something steadier. Resolve. Talia watched her carefully, as if Naomi might shatter again without warning. What are you thinking? She asked. Naomi answered honestly. I'm thinking about what happens next. That sentence was the first true thing she had said since the phone lit up. She reached for her own cell, unlocked it, and opened a note titled Vendor Contacts, a list she had made months ago, pragmatic and thorough. Her thumb hovered, then paused. No, this was not a vendor issue. This was not a scheduling problem. This was evidence. Naomi turned back to the pocket of her robe and drew out the burner phone. The screen was dark, but she felt its presence like heat. She powered it on again, and the cold light returned, indifferent to human pain. The message thread opened where she had left it. Naomi's heart tightened, but she did not look away. She began doing what she had done in 100 cases, separating feeling from fact. Facts first. She took screenshots, carefully, methodically, capturing the messages with timestamps visible. She scrolled back far enough to show pattern, months of contact, repeated references to lies, the shared knowledge of secrecy. She saved each image to her own phone, then to a secure cloud folder whose password Andrew did not know. She was not building a story. She was building a record. Talia leaned closer, her voice small. Naomi, are you... collecting this? Naomi nodded. I'm preserving it. Because you want to sue him? Naomi didn't answer right away. The impulse toward revenge was there, hot and tempting, but she refused to be led by it. Revenge could be sloppy. Revenge could be used against you. Naomi wanted something cleaner. I want options, she said at last. I want the truth to be unmovable. She thought of Andrew's world, the world he cultivated so carefully, the committees and donors, the polite handshakes and strategic smiles, the reputation that wrapped around him like armor. A man like Andrew did not fear heartbreak. He feared exposure. But exposure alone wasn't enough. Naomi had seen men survive scandals by reshaping the narrative, painting themselves as victims, calling women unstable, framing cruelty as misunderstanding. She could already predict the phrases. It's not what it looks like. She's overreacting. We were under stress. She misinterpreted. She's emotional. Naomi swallowed. She would not be made into a spectacle for someone else's convenience. Talia's jaw clenched. He can't get away with this. Naomi's gaze stayed on the screen. He won't. Her voice surprised even her. Not loud, not dramatic. Certain. She locked the burner phone again and placed it on the table. For a moment, she simply stared at it, thinking. Not as a woman betrayed, but as a woman with training, with instincts honed by years of reading people who believed they could bend reality with charm. Andrew had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the kind of woman he was betraying. Naomi opened her laptop, already set up with wedding timelines and seating charts, and created a new document. She titled it with quiet irony, Disclosure. Underneath, she began to outline what she needed. Verification. Ensure screenshots show dates, times, and the contact identifier. Witnesses. Identify who can confirm Andrew had the portfolio, who delivered it, and when. Chain of custody. Keep the burner phone secure. Photograph it. Record where it was found. Narrative control. Decide what is disclosed publicly and what is reserved for legal action. Safety and optics. Consider how to avoid being portrayed as volatile or vindictive. Naomi paused over the last line. As a Black woman, especially one with a public-facing career, she knew the world's appetite for misinterpretation. Rage would be called aggression. Tears would be called instability. Even dignity could be twisted into arrogance. If she chose a public confrontation, it had to be disciplined. It had to be undeniable. It had to be factual. And it had to be safe. She looked at Talia. Do you trust the venue's AV team? Talia blinked. The sound and projection people? Yes. Talia hesitated, then nodded slowly. I've worked with them. They're professional. Professional means they follow instructions, Naomi said. And it means they'll remember if something goes wrong. Talia's eyes widened. Naomi, what are you planning? Naomi looked back at the dress hanging by the window. The silk caught the light like a promise still waiting to be kept. For a moment, grief flickered again, soft, aching, stubborn. Then she turned away from it. I'm planning to protect myself, she said. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. Guests were arriving now, stepping from cars, smoothing coats, laughing. People who loved her. People who had taken time to witness her happiness. People who believed they were coming to celebrate an honest union. Naomi pressed her fingertips to the glass, feeling the coolness against her skin. I refuse, she said quietly, to let them celebrate a lie in my name. Behind her, Talia whispered, Then what do we do? Naomi turned. In her eyes, the last remnants of confusion had hardened into something clean. We proceed, she said. Talia's breath caught. Proceed with the wedding? Naomi nodded once. With the event, with the timeline, with the room full of witnesses. She took a slow breath, feeling her heartbeat steady itself into rhythm. In court, Naomi continued, timing is everything. Evidence matters, yes, but so does the moment you present it. The right moment is not when you're shaking. It's when everyone is paying attention. Talia stared at her as if she were seeing her for the first time. Naomi returned her gaze calmly. The bride everyone expects is still here, she said. She'll walk down that aisle. She'll stand where she's supposed to stand. She'll smile where she's supposed to smile. She stepped back toward the vanity and reached for the burner phone again, slipping it into her pocket with a gentleness that felt almost tender. And then, Naomi said, voice soft as silk, the lawyer wakes up. Outside, the cathedral bells began to ring with more confidence now, no longer practicing, but preparing. The afternoon tilted toward 4 o'clock with graceful inevitability. Naomi Carter stood in a room full of lace and flowers, her eyes still bright with recent tears, her heart still bruised with love. But her mind was awake. And when Naomi's mind woke up, it did not drift. It took control. A faceless betrayal is a wound you can almost pretend is abstract. It is pain without shape, a shadow without edges. You can call it an affair, a mistake, a secret, and the language itself cushions the impact. But once betrayal has a name, once it has a body occupying the same air you breathe, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes personal. Naomi stood in the bridal suite with the quiet poise of a woman rehearsing composure, though inside her thoughts moved with razor clarity. The cathedral downstairs was filling steadily now. She could hear it, doors opening, footsteps on old stone, the soft swell of conversation like waves against a shore. Every sound carried the assumption of joy. Talia held Naomi's gaze as if searching for cracks. You want me to find her, she said, not a question now, but acceptance. Naomi nodded. Discreetly, Talia exhaled, steadying herself. She was a PR strategist by trade, a woman who had managed crises for politicians and nonprofits, who understood the mathematics of perception. Naomi trusted her because Talia's loyalty was fierce, and because she knew how to move through a room without being seen. She said back row, Talia murmured, thinking aloud. Aisle side. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly at the memory of those words. She reached into her pocket, withdrew the burner phone, and showed Talia the message thread again. Only the key line, the one that placed the other woman inside the sanctuary. I don't want guesses, Naomi said. I want certainty. Talia nodded once. You'll have it. She picked up a satin wrap from the chair, something bridal enough to make her presence upstairs seem normal, and draped it over her shoulders. Then she leaned in, kissed Naomi's cheek and whispered, Stay here. Breathe. I'll be back before anyone notices I'm gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Naomi was alone again. In the mirror, her eyes looked darker than they had this morning. Not emptier, sharper. She watched her own face as if studying a client, a witness, a version of herself that needed guidance. A minute passed. 2. The suite felt too quiet without Talia's steady energy. Naomi listened to the distant hum of celebration and felt a strange resentment rise. How easily the world kept moving while her life fractured. How quickly joy could become an uninvited soundtrack to pain. She forced her breath to slow, counting silently the way she had in courthouse bathrooms before difficult hearings. In, out, in. A knock came at the door. Naomi's spine stiffened, but it wasn't Lucas or a coordinator this time. It was one of the stylists, peeking in with a smile too bright to be real. 10 minutes, she chirped. We're almost ready for final touch-ups. Naomi returned a soft smile automatically, the kind that lived in her muscles even when her heart was elsewhere. Thank you, she said. We'll be ready. The stylist vanished. The clock ticked. When the door finally opened again, it was Talia. Her face had changed. Not with shock. Talia wasn't easily shaken, but with something more complicated. Disgust laced with disbelief, outrage tempered by calculation. Her eyes flicked to Naomi's, and for a moment she didn't speak, as if words were too small for what she had seen. Naomi's stomach tightened. Who is she? She asked softly. Talia shut the door behind her and leaned against it, as if grounding herself. Then she crossed the room quickly, lowering her voice. She's exactly where the message said, Talia whispered. Back row, aisle seat, near the side exit. Naomi's fingers curled gently around the edge of the vanity. And, she pressed, do you recognize her? Talia's throat worked as she swallowed. I do. She stepped closer, as though the walls might listen. Naomi, she said, voice dropping even further. You've met her. The words landed like ice. Naomi blinked once. When? At that fundraiser in Charleston. The housing equity panel, the one Andrew insisted on attending. Talia's eyes narrowed. She was with his team. I remember because she kept hovering near him, always close enough to be included in photos. Naomi's mind snapped to the memory. A hotel ballroom, bright lights, polite applause. Andrew's hand on Naomi's back. A young woman offering Naomi a drink with a smile that looked too polished to be innocent. Her name? Naomi asked, though she already felt the answer forming like a bruise. Talia exhaled. Claire Hollis. Naomi repeated it silently. Claire Hollis. A white American junior policy advisor, Talia continued, voice edged with contempt. She works under him on the redevelopment initiative. She's new-ish, came on a few months ago. And Naomi, she's wearing a cream dress. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Cream? Not white, Talia said bitterly, but close enough to make a point, close enough to be rude, without breaking the rules. A sound escaped Naomi's throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. She pressed her palm lightly to her chest, as if she could calm the tightness there with touch. The betrayal was no longer a nameless C on a screen. It was a woman in a carefully chosen dress, seated near an exit, close to escape and close to power. A woman who had stepped into Naomi's sacred day with deliberate confidence, as though she belonged there. Naomi felt something shift again, an emotional pivot so subtle it might have been mistaken for calm. But it wasn't calm, it was focus. What is she doing? Naomi asked. Talia's expression tightened. Texting, constantly. She keeps checking her phone, scanning the front, then pretending she's just another guest. Naomi pictured it vividly. Claire's hands, careful on a screen. Claire's eyes, trained to stay composed. Claire's mouth, arranged into a polite smile for anyone watching. She imagined her posture, too relaxed for an outsider, too entitled for an innocent bystander. Does she look nervous? Naomi asked. Talia shook her head once. Not nervous. Then, with a cold precision that made Naomi's blood run slightly colder, she added, she looks pleased. Naomi closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Pleased. As if this were entertainment. As if Naomi were a character in a story Claire believed she was about to win. When Naomi opened her eyes again, the grief was still there. Quiet, aching, undeniable. But it no longer owned the room. It had been placed in a corner like something Naomi could return to later, when the immediate work was done. Okay, Naomi said. Talia stared at her. That's all you have to say? Naomi's voice remained gentle, almost tender. No, she replied. That's all I'm willing to say right now. She reached for Talia's hand and squeezed once, grateful for the steady presence. You did exactly what I needed. Talia's eyes glistened. Naomi released her hand and turned toward the dress hanging by the window. The silk caught the afternoon light, looking almost holy in its stillness. A garment meant for vows, for promises, for joy. Naomi touched the fabric with her fingertips, and for a moment she felt the ghost of the woman she had been this morning, the bride who believed love would be enough. Then she withdrew her hand. Claire Hollis had a seat in the sanctuary. Andrew Whitmore had a smile waiting at the altar, and Naomi Carter, standing in a room full of lace and quiet, finally understood something with crystalline certainty. This was not simply about losing a man. This was about reclaiming herself, publicly, unmistakably, and on her own terms. The other woman had been identified. Now the story had a face, and Naomi had never been afraid of looking the truth directly in the eye. There is a moment, after the truth is known and before action is taken, when silence becomes a courtroom. No witnesses speak, no verdict is delivered, And yet every principle you have ever lived by takes its seat, waiting to be heard. Naomi stood alone in the bridal suite, while Talia stepped out to intercept the coordinator and buy them time. The room felt different now, not hostile, not unsafe, but stripped of illusion. The flowers no longer looked celebratory. The mirror no longer offered reassurance. Everything had become neutral, as though the world had stepped back and said, "Choose." Naomi closed her eyes and rested her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, Savannah unfolded in its usual grace. Sunlight warmed the brick streets. A horse-drawn carriage passed slowly, tourists laughing, unaware that a life was being carefully recalibrated just above them. The contrast was almost cruel in its beauty. This was the moment Naomi had been preparing for her entire career, though she had never known it. As a civil rights attorney, she had built her reputation not on volume or spectacle, but on restraint. She believed in the quiet authority of truth, in facts presented without embellishment, in dignity as both shield and sword. She had counseled clients through moments of righteous fury, reminding them that justice demanded discipline. Now she was her own client. The temptation was there, hot and vivid. She could expose Andrew in a way that would scorch him permanently. She could weaponize the room full of witnesses, turn his carefully constructed life into public ash. The evidence in her pocket could detonate with devastating force. And for a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. The satisfaction, the gasps, the relief of being seen, believed, vindicated. Her pulse quickened at the thought, then slowed, because Naomi knew something that pain often tries to obscure. Not every action that feels justified is just. She turned away from the window and sat at the vanity, folding her hands in her lap. The gesture was almost ceremonial. She was not bracing herself. She was centering herself. What was the line? Public exposure would punish Andrew, but it would also mark Naomi. The world loved spectacle, but it devoured women who controlled it, especially women who looked like her. She could already hear the commentary sharpening its teeth. Why would she do this on their wedding day? Why couldn't she handle it privately? Is this really necessary? Pain, Naomi knew, was rarely granted the benefit of context. And then there was Claire. Claire Hollis had crossed a line. There was no question of that. But she was also a junior advisor, a woman entangled in a power dynamic that Naomi understood all too well. That did not absolve her, but it complicated the story. Naomi did not want to become someone who destroyed indiscriminately. She wanted accountability, not chaos. She wanted truth, not theater. Her phone vibrated softly in her pocket, her own phone this time. A text from the coordinator. 5 minutes until lineup. Time was narrowing. Naomi rose and paced slowly, the hem of her robe whispering against the floor. She replayed her options with the cool clarity she used in strategy meetings. Option 1, cancel everything. Walk away quietly. Let Andrew manage the fallout privately. Protect herself from scrutiny, but allow the lie to remain intact in public. Option 2, confront Andrew alone. Demand explanations. Extract apologies that would never be enough. Leave without witnesses, without record. Option 3, expose everything all at once. Burn it down. Naomi stopped walking. There was a fourth option, one that lived between mercy and justice, between silence and spectacle. Disclosure. Not accusation, not vengeance. Disclosure. She would not editorialize. She would not dramatize. She would not raise her voice or sharpen her language. She would present the truth exactly as it existed, unfiltered, undeniable, and inescapably public. She would let the facts speak. In law, disclosure was a sacred act. It was the moment when information was placed on the record, no longer subject to manipulation. It was not about punishment. It was about integrity. Naomi felt her breathing steady as the decision settled. She would not humiliate Andrew. She would reveal him. She would not attack Claire. She would remove the protection secrecy had afforded her. She would not perform rage. She would perform truth. Naomi returned to the mirror and studied herself closely. Her eyes were still rimmed with red, but they were clear. Her mouth was set, not hard, but firm. She looked like a woman who had crossed something invisible and emerged changed. "Stay clean," she murmured to her reflection. "Stay precise." A knock came at the door, gentler this time. Talia slipped inside, her expression cautious. "They're ready," she said. "Everyone's seated." Naomi nodded. Talia hesitated. "Are you okay?" Naomi considered the question honestly. "No," she said, "but I'm ready." She reached into her pocket and felt the burner phone there, solid and real. Evidence, not weapon. Truth, not threat. Naomi took one last look at the room, the place where she had believed, where she had broken, where she had decided who she would be when belief failed. The ethical line was no longer theoretical. She had drawn it. And as she stepped forward to meet the moment waiting downstairs, Naomi carried with her not revenge, not forgiveness, but something far rarer and far more powerful. She carried herself. A detonation, if it is to be controlled, must be prepared in silence. Not the silence of fear. Naomi had already passed through that, but the silence of precision. In the minutes that remained before the ceremony, she moved through the bridal suite with a calm so deliberate it bordered on unreal, like a dancer stepping into choreography she had rehearsed in the dark. Talia watched her with that mixture of devotion and dread, reserved for women who love you and still cannot quite follow you into the fire. "You're sure?" Talia asked softly. Naomi lifted her gaze from the open laptop. "I'm sure of the truth," she replied, "and I'm sure of what happens when truth is left in private hands." She did not say Andrew's name. She didn't need to. His absence from her language was its own verdict. On the screen, the folder labeled Ceremony Media sat open, something the venue coordinator had asked Naomi to provide weeks ago. It was meant to be harmless, a short montage of engagement photos set to gentle music, projected briefly before the processional. A sweet beginning, a sentimental preface, a story. Naomi stared at the folder as if it were a living thing. She had already deleted the montage, not out of spite, but out of necessity. The photographs were too tender, too honest. They were the kind of images that could be weaponized later, cropped, reposted, rewritten to support whatever narrative Andrew decided to sell. Naomi would not give him that. Those memories belonged to her, and she would not allow them to become props in his rescue. Instead, she created a new folder, Disclosure, Read Only. Inside it, she placed the evidence she had collected. Screenshots, timestamps, the thread header, the line that placed Claire in the sanctuary. She chose only what could withstand scrutiny, messages that required no interpretation, no dramatic framing. The words were blunt enough on their own. She added one document, a simple title card in clean black lettering against white. Before vows are spoken, the truth must be known. No names, no insults, no accusation, only a statement of principle. Talia leaned closer, eyes scanning the screen, and inhaled sharply. "This is immaculate," she whispered, part admiration, part grief. "You've turned heartbreak into a filing." Naomi's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I've turned it into a record," she corrected. She checked the timestamps again, zooming in until the digits were unmistakable. She ensured the contact label, C, was visible. She included one earlier message that referenced an excuse Andrew had used with Naomi, a bridge between public life and private deceit. She included the most recent message about the back row because it transformed infidelity into orchestration. One message could be denied, a pattern could not. When she was satisfied, she saved everything as a single PDF, locked, time-stamped, and named with quiet finality. Disclosure _14 October _Savannah.pdf. Then she copied it onto a small, silver USB drive. Her hands did not shake. Her heart did. Talia's voice trembled. "We're really doing this." Naomi looked up, her eyes steady. "We are not doing anything," she said gently. I am. Those words were not a rejection. They were responsibility made explicit. Naomi walked to the door and opened it just enough to gesture to the wedding coordinator waiting in the hall. The coordinator, Sasha, a woman with a headset and an air of permanent competence, smiled brightly. Naomi, you look gorgeous. We're ready whenever. Naomi interrupted her with soft authority. Sasha, I need 2 minutes with the AV technician. Alone. Sasha blinked, surprised, then recovered quickly. Of course. Is something wrong with the montage? It's been updated, Naomi said. I need to ensure it's loaded properly. Sasha nodded as if last-minute changes were normal, because in weddings, they often were. I'll send him up. A minute later, the AV technician arrived, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and the careful posture of someone who makes his living being invisible. His name tag read Marcus. Yes, ma'am, he asked politely. Coordinator said you had an update. Naomi held out the USB drive between 2 fingers. This file needs to run the moment the doors open, she said, voice calm and exact. It is important that it plays in full. Marcus took the drive, frowning slightly. Is it a video? It will display on the projection system, Naomi replied. And Marcus, there is one condition. His gaze lifted to hers. It must not be previewed, Naomi said. Not by you, not by anyone. It is time sensitive. Marcus hesitated. We usually test. Naomi leaned in slightly, not threatening, not pleading, simply presenting reality. If you preview it, she said softly, you compromise the integrity of what I'm doing. Talia's breath caught behind her. Marcus studied Naomi's face for a moment. He seemed to see something in her expression, something beyond bridal nerves, something that belonged to a different kind of day. He nodded slowly. Understood. I'll load it without opening. Naomi extended her hand. I need your word. Marcus placed a hand over his chest as if the gesture were instinctive. You have it. Naomi watched him leave, her posture still, her pulse controlled. When the door closed again, the suite felt suspended between 2 realities, the wedding they had planned and the truth that was about to replace it. Talia stepped forward, voice barely audible. What if Andrew stops it? Naomi walked to the mirror and touched the edge of the glass, grounding herself. He won't have time, she said, and even if he tries, he can't unring a bell once it's heard. She looked at herself, at the bride she appeared to be, and felt the strange ache of mourning something that had not yet officially died. The love had been real, at least on her side. The dream had been carefully tended. There was grief in that, a grief that deserved tenderness. Naomi allowed herself one quiet moment to honor it. Then she let it go. The detonation was set, not to destroy indiscriminately, but to illuminate. Not to satisfy rage, but to restore reality. Truth was not a fire meant to scorch the innocent. Truth was a light. And Naomi had carried too many cases where darkness won simply because no one had the courage to turn the light on. A knock came. Sasha again, voice bright through the door. 2 minutes, Naomi. It's time to line up. Naomi's reflection looked back, composed, almost serene. Talia approached her, hands trembling as she adjusted Naomi's robe collar, a small ritual of care. I'm with you, she whispered. Naomi reached out and held Talia's hands for a beat. I know, she said, and I need you to stay steady. Talia nodded fiercely, blinking back tears. Naomi slipped her own phone into her pocket. Then, after a breath that felt like crossing a threshold, she moved toward the dress hanging by the window. The silk caught the sunlight one last time, glowing with the innocence it had been chosen for. Naomi touched it gently, not as armor, not as costume, but as a symbol she refused to surrender. She would walk down that aisle. She would stand in the light. And when the doors opened, the truth would open with them. Quiet, inevitable, perfectly timed. A controlled detonation, not to end a love story, to end a lie. The cathedral held its breath. Downstairs, the sanctuary had filled the way a tide fills a shore. Slowly at first, then all at once. Guests settled into polished pews, smoothing fabric over knees, whispering greetings, leaning close to share small updates that felt important only because love was supposed to be happening in front of them. The air smelled of old stone and fresh flowers, of gardenias placed carefully to soften history into romance. Stained glass gathered the afternoon sun and broke it into color: amber, sapphire, rose. Light spilled across the aisle in quiet ribbons, and every ribbon seemed to say the same thing. This is sacred. This is beautiful. This is true. At the front, Andrew Whitmore waited near the altar. He stood tall in a dark suit, tailored with the kind of precision that made a man look reliable even when he wasn't. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw cleanly shaved, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested calm rather than arrogance. To the guests, he was the image they had come to celebrate: the devoted groom, the steady partner, the man who had been fortunate enough to win Naomi Carter's heart. Andrew smiled when someone in the first row caught his eye and nodded. He adjusted his cufflink with a casual elegance that looked practiced, natural. A man at ease in a room full of witnesses. But beneath that polish lived a restlessness, a small, persistent tension in his shoulders, the slightest flicker in his gaze whenever a phone vibrated somewhere in the crowd. He was composed, yes, but not softened. He was waiting, not only for Naomi, for something else. His best man, Lucas Reed, stood beside him with hands clasped tightly in front of his waist. Lucas's face held a careful blankness, the kind people wear when they are bracing for impact. He had laughed and joked earlier in the day, because that was what men did to keep discomfort from revealing itself. Now he was quiet. Now he avoided Andrew's eyes. Andrew leaned close and murmured, "Everything's set?" Lucas's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Yeah," he replied, "everything's set." Andrew nodded, satisfied, and turned his attention back down the aisle. If he noticed Lucas's stiffness, he chose not to interpret it. Andrew had always been skilled at seeing only what served him. The music in the sanctuary shifted, soft, familiar strings meant to cue anticipation. Guests straightened, faces brightening. Mothers reached for tissues. Fathers sat with hands folded, pretending they weren't emotional. Someone behind the third pew whispered, "She's going to look stunning." The photographer moved quietly along the side wall, capturing the shimmering expectation the way one captures candlelight. Near the back, by the aisle, exactly where the burner phone had described, Claire Hollis sat in a cream dress that flirted shamelessly with white without claiming it outright. She held her phone low in her lap, screen angled away from prying eyes, fingers moving in small, nervous motions. She looked composed. But her composure had edges. Her knee bounced slightly, a betraying rhythm beneath polished stillness. Every few seconds her gaze darted toward the front, then toward the doors, then down at her phone again, as though she were waiting for reassurance she could not request aloud. She was close to the side exit, close to escape, close to control. The sanctuary remained unaware. People smiled at her politely, assuming she was a coworker, a distant cousin, a friend of the groom's family. No one questioned her presence. Why would they? Weddings were full of strangers who belonged to someone else. Only one woman in the building knew exactly who Claire was. Only one woman knew why she was there. Upstairs, Naomi Carter stood behind closed doors with her father. He was dressed in a dark suit that made him look older than he was, not because time had hardened him, but because pride had made him solemn. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, a man's quiet attempt to manage emotion through fabric. When he looked at Naomi, his eyes softened. "You're beautiful," he said, voice thick with reverence. Naomi smiled gently. It was real enough to be convincing, but it carried a weight he could not name. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. He offered his arm. Naomi rested her hand on it, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palm. Her father had always been steady, the kind of man who loved with action rather than language. He didn't ask questions when she didn't offer them. He trusted her the way she had once trusted Andrew, deeply, without condition. The coordinator signaled from the hallway. "We're ready." Naomi inhaled. The air tasted faintly of perfume, in something sharper, metallic, like the memory of tears. Her dress settled against her skin, smooth and heavy, as though it had been designed not just for romance, but for endurance. The veil framed her face in soft translucence, turning her into an image people could project dreams onto. Talia stood behind her, hands clasped, eyes shining with restrained emotion. Not joy, not exactly. Something fiercer. Naomi looked at Talia once, a brief exchange that held an entire conversation. "We are steady," Talia nodded. The doors to the small vestibule opened, and Naomi and her father stepped into the corridor leading to the sanctuary. The sound changed immediately, muffled voices fading into hush, music rising, the room preparing itself for revelation. At the far end of the corridor stood the massive cathedral doors, carved wood polished to a dark gleam. They looked ancient, as if they had closed behind 1,000 prayers and opened for 1,000 promises. This time, they would open for truth. Naomi felt her heartbeat steady, not slow, not frantic, simply precise. Each beat seemed to count down. Her father squeezed her hand lightly. "You okay?" he asked. Naomi turned her face toward him, and for a second, the tenderness in her eyes almost broke her. Almost. Then she nodded. "I am," she said softly. "I'm right here." The coordinator lifted a finger. The music swelled. The sanctuary fell silent. And then, with a slow, ceremonial inevitability, the heavy doors began to swing inward. Light poured through the opening like a blessing. The guests turned as one, faces lifting, ready to witness love made official. Andrew's smile widened at the altar, practiced and bright. Lucas went rigid beside him. Claire's fingers tightened around her phone in the back row, her breath catching. And Naomi stepped forward into the aisle, radiant and unreadable, holding her father's arm as if she were walking toward a marriage. But inside her, the story had already changed. The ceremony had begun. And with it, the final minutes before everything the room believed in would be forced to confront what was real. The first step down the aisle felt like entering a different life. Naomi moved slowly, not because she needed time, but because she understood timing. The cathedral seemed to elongate around her, the aisle stretching as if it wanted to test the strength of her composure. Each footfall was softened by the runner beneath her heels, yet she heard it anyway, the quiet punctuation of a woman choosing not to collapse. Her father's arm was firm beneath her hand. He walked with the tender gravity of a man escorting his daughter toward joy. He did not know he was escorting her toward an ending. The guests rose, heads turned, faces warmed with admiration. In their eyes, Naomi could see the story they had come to witness. The brilliant attorney softened into a bride, the city's beloved couple finally sealing a promise with ceremony and light. Stained glass painted Naomi in color as she passed, rose on her cheek, gold across her veil, blue along the satin of her skirt. The effect was almost holy. Andrew watched her approach with the kind of smile that made strangers believe him. He stood straighter, as if Naomi's presence sanctified him. He looked proud, not humbled, certain, not awed. Naomi met his gaze once, only once. It was enough. He did not see a shattered woman. He saw the same Naomi he had always expected, controlled, graceful, committed. He mistook her calm for obedience. Behind him, the officiant waited with hands folded and eyes kind. He smiled at Naomi as she advanced, unaware that kindness was about to be tested by truth. Naomi's eyes moved past the altar, scanning the back row with a quiet inevitability. Claire Hollis sat exactly where Talia had said she would. Aisle seat, close to the side door. Cream dress, pale hands, a phone held low like a secret kept against the thigh. Her gaze darted between Naomi and Andrew, searching for something. A signal, a reassurance, an opening. For a fleeting moment, Naomi felt a familiar ache, an old romantic instinct to protect the sacredness of a ceremony, to spare the room discomfort, to carry pain privately so others could keep their faith in love. That instinct had been trained into women like Naomi since girlhood. Be graceful, be quiet, be forgiving. Be the one who absorbs. Naomi let the ache exist. Then she walked through it. Halfway down the aisle, the music shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The gentle strings faltered, as if the melody itself had hesitated. A new sound began to rise from the speakers, low and steady, not romantic but commanding. A few guests glanced at one another, puzzled. Someone whispered, "Is that different?" Andrew's brow creased. The smile on his face tightened at the edges as he turned his head slightly toward the sound booth. The reaction was small, but Naomi saw it. The first crack in his public composure. The projection screen above the altar, which had remained dark through the opening, flickered to life. A soft hum filled the air, electric, expectant. The screen brightened, illuminating faces in pale light. The guests' attention lifted instinctively, as though the room itself had directed them upward. Andrew looked up. Confusion crossed his features, then irritation. The screen was not part of the ceremony, not yet. It was supposed to remain blank until the reception, until nostalgia and sweetness could be served like dessert. Naomi continued walking. Her father's breath was audible now, a quiet effort beside her. His hand trembled slightly against her arm, emotion thick in his chest. He believed he was witnessing the culmination of her happiness. Naomi wanted, briefly, painfully, to protect him from what was coming. But protection, she realized, was what had brought her here. Protection of Andrew's image. Protection of the relationship's story. Protection of a man who had not protected her. Naomi lifted her chin. The screen displayed a simple title card, clean and stark in black lettering against white. Before vows are spoken, the truth must be known. The cathedral went silent, not the gentle silence of reverence, but the stunned silence of confusion, the kind that spreads quickly, like frost. Andrew's mouth parted slightly. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if uncertain whether moving would help or harm him. Lucas, beside him, turned pale. Naomi reached the front row. She paused, still several feet from the altar, positioned where every camera could see her face, where every guest could see her posture. She did not look at Andrew. She looked at the screen. The title card vanished. The first screenshot appeared. A text message, enlarged, crisp, unmistakable. The date and time were visible. The contact label glared from the top. See, a collective intake of breath rippled through the pews. Someone's hand flew to their mouth. Someone else whispered, "What is this?" Naomi heard none of it the way she used to hear sound. She registered it as atmosphere, as evidence of attention. The room was listening now. The message on the screen read plainly, without embellishment. "Last night was perfect. I still can't believe you pulled that excuse off." The second screenshot replaced it quickly. "I hate that I have to pretend tomorrow. Just a few more hours, then we'll be free." A murmur spread, soft at first, then growing. Heads turned, eyes widened. A few guests reached for their phones with trembling urgency, as if their bodies understood they were witnessing something historic. Andrew's face drained of color. He stared at the screen like a man watching his own reflection betray him. He shook his head once, sharply, as if denial were a physical act that might undo a fact. "No," he hissed, low, meant only for the altar. "No, turn that off." His voice was not loud enough to carry, but the panic behind it was visible to everyone. He took another step forward, then another, his composure cracking in thin, jagged lines. Naomi did not move. She stood like a pillar dressed in silk. The screen changed again. The message appeared that transformed private deceit into public orchestration, the one that made the betrayal crueler than infidelity and colder than lust. "I'm already seated. Back row, aisle side. Don't look at me during the vows. She's watching." A gasp cut through the cathedral like a blade. People turned, almost as one, toward the back row. The camera feed, controlled from the booth, activated suddenly, as if the building itself had decided to bear witness. The projection shifted from text to live video. It panned over rows of stunned faces, paused briefly on Andrew's horrified parents in the front, then glided farther back. Naomi watched the screen, her heartbeat steady, her hands still. The camera found Claire Hollis. Claire froze. For a split second, the cream dress, the carefully done hair, the practiced calm all held together. An image of innocence clinging desperately to its last thread. Then her face crumpled. Her eyes widened in raw terror as the truth spotlighted her in front of everyone who had been smiling only moments ago. Her hand jerked toward her phone, then fell uselessly to her lap. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The room erupted into a chaos of whispers and disbelief. "Oh my God! Is that her? Is this real?" Andrew turned toward the back row, his head snapping with involuntary panic. And in that movement, he committed the final, unforgivable proof. He looked directly at Claire, not like a stranger, not like a confused groom, but like a man checking on a co-conspirator. The cathedral saw it. Naomi saw it. The world, in one devastating instant, understood. Naomi stepped forward then, one smooth step, a quiet reclaiming of space, and gently released her father's arm. His gaze was locked on the screen, confusion and horror battling across his face. Naomi placed a hand over his for a heartbeat, an apology without words, a promise of steadiness. Then she turned her body toward the altar at last. Andrew's eyes found hers. They were wild now, pleading and furious at once. "Naomi," he whispered, voice shaking. "Stop, please. We can talk." Naomi did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. She lifted her chin slightly and spoke with the calm clarity of a woman placing truth on the record. "This is not a wedding," Naomi said, her voice carrying cleanly through the microphone that had been set for vows. "This is disclosure." The words landed with a weight that did not require explanation. There was no insult, no accusation, no performance. Only truth in public air, unavoidable, irreversible, and finally free. Silence followed, not the stunned silence of confusion, but the deeper quiet that arrives when truth has finished speaking. Naomi stood at the center of it, her white dress catching the last fragments of colored light from the stained glass. Around her, the cathedral felt altered, as though its walls had shifted to accommodate a new reality. The lie that had once filled the space had been removed, leaving behind something raw, echoing, and unmistakably honest. Andrew did not look like a man betrayed. He looked like a man unmasked. He tried to speak once more. His lips moved, a sound half-formed, but nothing meaningful survived the weight of what had been revealed. Lucas gently but firmly placed a hand on Andrew's arm, guiding him backward, away from the altar, away from the moment he no longer controlled. The guests parted instinctively, not in anger, not in cruelty, but in recognition. The story had ended. There was nothing left to negotiate. Claire had already slipped out through the side door, her presence evaporating as quickly as it had asserted itself. No chase followed, no words were needed. History would remember her absence far more clearly than any confrontation. Naomi turned then, not away from the altar, but toward the people who had gathered to witness love, and instead bore witness to courage. She saw shock on their faces, yes, but also something else: respect, understanding, relief that the truth had not been buried for the sake of comfort. "My apologies," Naomi said softly, her voice warm despite everything. "This ceremony will not continue as planned." She paused, just long enough for breath to settle. "But the truth has been spoken, and that matters more to me than tradition ever could." Her father stepped forward, placing his arm around her shoulders, not to shield her, but to stand beside her. In that gesture was everything Naomi needed to know. She had not lost her family. She had not lost herself. Later, much later, after the doors had closed and the cathedral emptied, Naomi stood alone outside, the savannah air cooling her skin. The river moved on, indifferent and eternal, reflecting the city lights like scattered stars. She slipped off her heels and held them in one hand, grounding herself in the simple human act. She was no longer a bride. She was something far rarer. A woman who had chosen truth over illusion. clarity over comfort, ownership over silence. Tomorrow would bring logistics, conversations, consequences. But tonight belonged to her. Tonight was not about what she had lost, but what she had refused to surrender. Her dignity, her voice, her future. Naomi lifted her face to the night sky and breathed, deeply and freely, as though for the first time in years. And as you close this story, if Naomi's journey moved you, if her choice to stand in truth resonated with your own quiet moments of courage, let that feeling linger. Share your thoughts in the comments, lend your support with a like, and follow the channel for more stories where strength wears elegance and truth finds its voice. Because sometimes the most romantic ending is not love reclaimed, but selfhood fully owned.